Yeshua, your King of praise. Shalom, everyone. This is Messianic Rabbi Buzz Tremé, the Jew teaching you. Welcome to our Bible study. Yeshua, you are the way. Yeshua. And so, we see that God made a separate covenant. Now, read the words to the whole book of Deuteronomy, and you'll see that part of the plan is you have to keep the Levitical covenant, the Mosaic covenant. If you don't keep it, you don't qualify for the land because you've broken the law already. So now, along with that, he says, I'm giving you another covenant. Under the old covenant, he told them, you won't enter the land if you possess unbelief. The book of Hebrews says they heard the gospel. What is the gospel here? We can go there in a minute. Hebrews 4. It says they too heard the gospel, but they didn't enter the land. The promise, go to Hebrews. New Testament, Hebrews 4. Hebrews chapter 4. Okay, chapter 4, verse 1, it says, and just prior to this, he says, they didn't enter the land, and it was because of unbelief. Chapter 4, verse 1. Therefore, since the promise, remember that promise in Ephesians 3:6? Paul says the Gentiles are heirs to the promise. Well, we read it and it's like, whatever that promise is, it's good that we're heirs. That Gentiles are heirs with God's people, Israel. Well, they were the heirs. Very clearly the Bible tells us that. And now you guys have joined them. But some of those branches of the tree had to be cut off because of unbelief. So they couldn't enter the promise. However you do. So the promise is not just a spiritual existence in heaven. That's just a part of the package where we get to go and be with Him in His place, which is a finite, definite place, referred to in the Bible as the third sky, the highest sky. And we've brought in the word heaven, and it kind of gives us almost a fairy tale. Of course, you go to this place in the sky where God dwells, where His counsel is, where our loved ones are now. The atoned are there, those who have been atoned for. But just keeping it real, there's a real place, and the Lord is coming back from that place at the proper time to fulfill the promises. Now, part of the promise is the land, and we have to remember that. It's an eternal promise, so therefore Gentiles have been grafted into it. So we have to understand, we're not just living to go to heaven. This is why we study the Bible. This is why we, and we don't want to build on somebody else's folly. Each of us got to give an account. I want to know what this thing's about. So, we seek the Lord, okay? Verse 1. Hebrews 4, therefore, since the promise of entering His rest, okay, this is the land of the rest. The slaves were freed, debts were paid, everything was its rest. The land was released from its bondage to the fall of man. He said the promise still stands. Let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Now that's a pretty serious thing. Aren't we glad the Bible doesn't cut corners? And the Lord never wrote this book and said, but I got to be careful about the Baptists. I got to be careful about those flaming charismatics or those Pentecostals or those Methodists or the Catholics. So aren't you glad? He wrote the book and said none of that other stuff matters at all, because there's only one body. And it was called Israel, the Kahal. And He's now grafted Gentiles into that package. They were promised a piece of real estate that they would possess forever, and you have to live forever to get it. Paul very clearly says in Galatians 3, if you are in Messiah, if you are in Christ, you are Abraham's seed and heirs to the promise. The meek will inherit what? The earth. So the gospel message is not always accurate, but it flourishes. But when it comes down to holding water, the ship sinks, right? Because only the truth can uphold you in calamity. Verse 2 says, for we also, referring to the first century Jews, which includes Gentiles who believe on Yeshua, for we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did. We're talking about the generation that did not enter. Chapter 3 deals with it very clearly. He says, so what's different? They got a gospel. What was the gospel? Well, let me read that word for you. For we also, verse 2, have had the gospel preached to us just as they did. They had a gospel preached. Now you know that good and well that Moses and his apostles, I'm being instructed to stand in front of the camera. I can't always tell where the camera's pointing. I'm lost in my own world. So, but we've had the gospel preached, and he says, as they did. Do you think Moses went to them, he gathered them together and says, Jesus saves. Put your faith in Jesus. You know, that's kind of how we look at it. No, that's not what he's talking about at all. What is the word gospel? What is it? Evangelion in Greek. But what is it really referring to? The good news. It's the word we've been waiting for. So Moses went to Egypt and said to the Israelites, guess what? I'm here to bring you into the promise God made to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You guys ready for it? It's promise keepers time. We're going to fulfill the promise. And most of them said, now who are you? And who is this God? So they left, but they weren't always willing, were they? And then when they got into the wilderness, it should have been just a short distance right on into the promised land. Oh no, it drug out for 40 years. God says, I swear they will never enter. Okay, now that we're talking about a promised land, first of all, it was a shadow of a greater reality, but the land is still the place. Zechariah 3 or 4 tells us that 3:9 that the land would be cleansed from its sinfulness in one day. When that man Yeshua, the cleanser and purifier of the universe, when his blood dripped out of his body, it fell on the soil at Jerusalem, Israel. And Zechariah, 400 years earlier, had foretold that blood would cleanse the land. The land is atoned for, but without application, faith in that fact, you don't have, I could give you a lifesaver if you're sinking in the river, but if you don't grab it and take advantage of it, it's of no avail, right? Okay, so these people had the gospel preached to them, but they couldn't get into the land because of unbelief. By the way, faith is not some mysterious thing, though that's what it was taught as during the faith movement. It's this thing, if you could just get it and hold on to it, you can make magical things happen. Faith is simply, when you study Hebrew and you see the word, what it really means and how it works, it means you trust what God says. Now, first of all, you can't trust or believe in what He says if you don't hear it. But since the Bible wrote it down, we can hear it. We can read it. God may speak to you a special direction for your life. He may speak into you, I want you to do this. I know personally I've left this country and gone to be a missionary and taken my family, and everybody that I knew didn't understand this. A lot of people that didn't know God, truthfully, were like, man, are you crazy? You want to reach people for Jesus? Do it right here in America. I said, but I was called to go to Germany. You know, it's just, so what made it work for us? And after this thing's all said and done, it definitely worked. The wall came down. I learned the language. Just as I get the language where I can preach to the people effectively, the wall comes down and we have revival. And God was preparing those people as well as us. And then He brings us back for something else. Understanding what I'm saying here is that I heard from God. My wife heard from God. I knew we were called. She told me where. I said, no, I didn't hear that. She said, you need to hear it. Germany is where we're going. I said, I didn't lose anything in Germany, never been there. We don't speak German, and we're going to where people are hungry, where they're really starving. And God spoke to me very clearly over a period of 4 years and showed me that they were starving. They're rich in the natural, but they were starving to death for the Word of God. And so the point is, I believed, I trusted what He said. It worked. It works when you hear from God. And I will tell you, it's not always easy to hear. So this is why you draw near to Him. You seek Him. You just keep pushing in there. You can't afford to assume that thought in my mind was God. You get close enough to God, you'll know what He says about a matter. If it's important, He'll make sure you don't mess it up because He's got something banking on this. He's got a reason for it. And so He'll reveal Himself. That's what faith is. So the people of Israel came out in the Exodus. They didn't trust God. They didn't know God. Moses had to even ask God, what's your name? Remember, Moses thought at one time he was going to be the Messiah. And he started talking to people about the gospel of the day, the deliverance into the promise of God. And what happened? People set out to kill him, and he fled and had to live out in the desert and become a shepherd for 40 years. Remember the story in Exodus? And then God comes and appears to him. He's still, they don't know God. They just know of Him and know of some of the generalities of God. But before it was over with, Moses and God were really close friends. And remember, God, Yahweh we're talking about, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or the Hebrew letters that form His name, He appears, men can't see Him, but in the biblical text, we see how He appears, and He appears as the angel of Yahweh. Okay, and don't get crazy about the word angel. Well, he was just an angel. No, the term means one who does the business of another. So we're angels in that respect. But there's another whole species of creatures that are angels, and we know, that's what we call angels. But anyway, so Moses got to know the angel of the Lord, who is the one that can be seen. And you see Him appearing often. Sometimes He appears with other angels, but He is always set apart. And one of the things that happens is they worship Him. Okay? The other angels will tell you right quick, get up, don't do that. I'm a fellow servant like you. Well, we're just sky-based and you're earth-based. By the way, you've become the heirs of everything, and we're going to serve you. Isn't that good?